Hello guys, I'm Yusaku here, and welcome to my Yugioh Vrains episode 12 review. Now, first things first, in this review, we're going to be talking about the result of this duel, and this duel, at least in my eyes, has basically been going on for 4 episodes, given how the speed duel was a no result, so it didn't really conclude, so to speak, there, and then we had the master duel going on since then, and I'm not too satisfied with the fact that Yusaku won. I would have liked to have seen him take a loss here to Revolver. I think we could have seen a lot more interesting stuff going on with the plot, and we would have gotten to some of the backstory probably faster, because he would have been kidnapped by Hanoi or something like that, probably, and it would have just been cool to see how he bounces from that, or if he doesn't, and I think we could have gotten some nice training montages with Go, all kinds of stuff, but I won't spend too much time on that, because obviously that's not what happened. But my biggest concern is, are we going to have another Yusei where he doesn't really lose throughout the show other than like once? That's my big worry, because I didn't like that part about Yusei. I like Yusei a lot as a protagonist, but the fact that he only really lost to Kiryu and that was it, other than the flashback with Jack, was extraordinarily frustrating. So I just fear having another Mary Sue type of protagonist, given how our others at least had a few more losses than that. Even if they were sort of strange losses, they were still losses nonetheless. Although I will give them some credit yet, and I'm not quite as concerned, because Dylan over at Yugioh Everything pointed out in his review of this episode that rivals have a tendency to usually do a little bit better the second time around against the main protagonist if they lose the first time. I mean, if you look at Kaiba, he did technically beat Yugi the second time they dueled, even if it was through a ludicrous type of win condition by basically forcing Yugi to surrender the match. And then if we look at GX, Zane was still a no result with Jaden. They tied, although the other rivals were a little bit more iffy, but GX broke a lot of patterns that were typical for Yu-Gi-Oh! For better or worse. 5Ds, Jack still lost, but Yusei's and Mary Sue. Zexal, Kite never lost to Yuma, so... And then we go on to Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, and Reiji won the second time when he sorta kinda lost the first time, depending on how you want to look at it, because his pendulum stuff glitched out. But nonetheless, full credit to Dylan on realizing that, but it does ease my concerns some. The other thing that makes me feel a little bit more okay with Yusaku winning this is we don't know for certain that Revolver was in a no-win scenario. It's very possible, because of the dialogue between he and his father, when his father mentions that you can't let yourself get distracted like that, or his dialogue was somewhere along those lines, that Revolver had another card he could have played during that duel, but he missed his opportunity to do it because he was so caught up in the fact that, oh, Yusaku's somebody from 10 years ago that I somehow know who he is and I recognize him, sort of in some way like that. The fact that he suddenly realized Playmaker left him in so much shock he didn't make his play that he could have, and that caused him to lose the duel. If that's the case, it could certainly be something sort of like what happened between Yusei and Jack the first time they dueled in 5Ds, where it was a no result, and it turned out Yusei would have won, and Jack realized that later. This was a win for Yusaku, but he may realize later, oh crap, Revolver had something else he could have done, and he should have won that duel. At which rate, I would be a little bit more happy with that if we realized that was the case down the road. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it's definitely a possibility given the whole distraction thing was brought up. It just implies to me that maybe there was something else Revolver could have done, and given how he seemed so incredibly confident in his defenses, it just comes across to me as there was probably one other thing he had left up his sleeve. While we're on the topic of Revolver's reaction to realizing that he knows Playmaker in some way from the past, let's go ahead and talk about how they sort of seem to imply to us that Revolver was the one who gave Yusaku courage. Now, after this episode, I might have just not listened close enough before, but I'm extremely confident that the voice that gave Yusaku courage is a young male voice. I feel like before it was a little bit more borderline. Maybe they changed the audio a little bit on purpose, or like I said, maybe I just wasn't listening close enough, but either way, that on top of the following other evidence really implies this. I mean, Revolver seems to react and hesitate extremely when Yusaku talks about the rule of 3 basically to keep himself motivating. Revolver suddenly hesitating a lot, which means, okay, he goes from being this brutal guy to not wanting to necessarily continue with the duel. Why? Because maybe he doesn't want to hurt Yusaku because he realizes he knew Yusaku before and suddenly he's feeling some sympathy for him. Maybe if Revolver knew Yusaku before and they were friends in that facility and he was helping Yusaku out there, he feels like, oh crap, maybe I just need to catch him up on what's going on and he can be on my side. To further fuel that theory that that's what caused Revolver to hesitate, and could also fuel my previous thing that maybe Revolver could have won that duel but just didn't. It basically, Revolver seems extraordinarily disappointed when he realizes that Yusaku is quote-unquote helping Soul Technologies, because I don't think he realizes that Yusaku isn't working for them, but more so just on his own vendetta. But regardless, he seems extremely disappointed in the similar way that, like, a friend catching another friend, starting a really bad habit that's dangerous to them would be. So I think there's definitely that huge implication, once more, that they are connected in their past. Another key thing I want to point out about this part is Revolver says, "So you were the one from all those years ago." This makes me wonder, were there just 2 kids in that facility? And that, like, the whole thing with the kids being taken out of the forest thing, and there were 6 of them, is, like, a different thing. It wasn't connected to the facility we've seen Yusaku in before, because the one makes it sound like it might have just been those 2, or maybe he's just referencing the fact that he was just talking to Yusaku. I'm thinking it's probably the latter of the 2 that I just mentioned, but it's certainly now, I guess, a possibility that there were just 2 of them. I'm thinking it's probably still 6, because 6 signer birds, 6 kids in the forest, and everything else, but we'll just have to wait and see. It seems these 2 have some things that are unique to them, though, with the whole rule of 3, and the fact that they've communicated with each other if Revolver does indeed turn out to be the one who gave Yusaku courage. And if that's the case, that's going to be awesome to watch play out. I don't think they're going to mess it up too bad, because they've led up to it really well so far. At least I'm hoping they don't mess it up. Another key attribute to point out about Revolver's whole revelation that he may know who Playmaker is that Revolver's father also seems to have come to the conclusion that he may know who Playmaker is, because he said fate seems to work in mysterious ways or something like that if you are indeed that person from all that time ago. And if Revolver's father knows and Revolver knows, I'm thinking they were definitely Revolver was the guy who gave Yusaku courage, because parents usually have a pretty good idea of what their kids are up to, and that would be why Revolver's father knows him. Either way, I think for certain we can pretty much guarantee that, yes, Revolver was in some way involved in that facility, and his father quite well may have been too. Heck, I'm going to even spring another crazy theory on it, that Revolver's father was doing whatever these kids were put under, and his kid was there not as one of, like, the test subjects, so to speak, but he was there and he was kind of, like, empathizing with the kids to some extent and those types of things, and Revolver felt guilt for what had happened, and that's why he hesitated against Playmaker in the duel and seemed disappointed that he had to fight him because of guilt for the actions of the past. It's hard to say, and that's, like, crazy amounts of prediction, but I think it could be cool to watch it play out that way. And all of this above everything else has made me really wonder, what is that facility really tied to? It clearly probably had something to do with the Cyverse, given how everything seems to be lining up around the same time period right there. The question becomes, what exactly? What connected all of these at the same time? And I'm definitely thinking that Revolver's father worked for Soul Tech and left because of whatever was tied to this. So what is it that Soul Tech had planned that involved what seems to be like dual experimentation with kids and living Cyverse organisms? Something just doesn't seem right there. I'm thinking more and more and more that these chess pieces are going to be our main antagonists of the first arc of this show, and everything just seems to keep pressing upon that, and that Revolver's father almost ends up being a little bit like what Yusei's father ended up being in 5Ds, where he was manipulated and doing something destructive without realizing it, only he's not dead like Yusei's father, but that's a different topic for a different time. So I'm just super excited to find out what that is, like what this facility was and how it connects to the Cyverse, because I think it's almost indisputable that they must be connected in some way if they are locking in at the same time period, and everything seems to revolve around that time in regards to the plot that's happening now. So with those being the main heavy plot elements out of the way, let's move on to a few more minor things I'd like to point out about this episode, and then we'll move on to the stuff that happens in the closing with AI. So in this episode, Yusaku refers to himself when he's speaking to Revolver as the agent of revenge, or it was something like that, which just comes across to me as very much unlike our other Yu-Gi-Oh protagonists, because they used to, speak of themselves they were a very righteous group, let's put it that way, and they would never use the word like trying to get revenge. Avenge maybe, but revenge has just got a much darker tone to it. So with that being the case, I think they've probably set a course, the writers, for Yusaku to grow a lot more than we've seen of any of the other main protagonists in a while, and in a very different direction than what we've seen, because I think he's going to end up turning into much more of our typical Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist, or at least in the sense that Yusei was, I would guess, like not quite as outgoing as some of the others and those types of things, but still has very much good intentions and is selfless in many regards. And we're starting to see some of that selflessness, but I think that darker side and that part that is a little bit more aggressive is still within him, and we're going to have to watch that development unravel. I think that'll be great to watch, because I think Yu-Gi-Oh protagonists aren't always the best at developing. I'll always give Yuma a lot of credit in that field. Next on my list of more minor points to make is the fact that supposedly, I'm pretty sure it's Emma's going to be doing Playmaker about 2 episodes from now, which I think basically confirms the other employer that she mentioned. I think it was episode 8 where she mentioned that in her conversation with Akira, is probably Soltech, and that's the reason she's dueling Playmaker in order to try and get the Ignis back for them. Now, I think she's going to end up turning sides because she seems to already be developing respect for Playmaker, and she continued to help Akira despite the fact that he's going to be sort of probably being hunted by Soltech. They said in this episode that now he has too much information, they're going to have to fire him. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't try and quiet him and possibly pursue him in some way either, given that they seem to be a fairly shady company the more that we get to know about them. So with them being sort of against Akira and definitely against Playmaker, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up turning sides, but for now she's with them. And one of the people in the comment section of my episode 1 review of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds was bringing up how he believed that Emma will end up revealing some information about Soltech during that duel, or at least we're going to be getting some information during that duel between her and Yusaku, and I think that was an extremely valid point to make. Probably going to happen. Full credit to them on that one. So excellent theory there. I think it was probably totally accurate. And in terms of my other thoughts on this episode, let's go ahead and move on to the end when Ignis ends up getting his body back. I had no idea he was that tiny. Like, he's incredibly minuscule, and I think that's kind of the point. Ignis continues to be a great comic relief character as a result, because you're expecting to see him be like this huge guy based on the fact that he's like flexing these enormous muscles and those types of things. He's coming out of Yusaku's dual disc, and then he turns out to be tiny. So that was a really funny moment. We don't get a whole lot more out of that scene in that episode, at least not that I picked up on. So as always, guys, be sure to let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and as always, have a nice day.